So let's broaden sort of our perspective, if we can, a little bit, DJ, and look beyond our own country's borders. You have some sense. I gather you traveled earlier in your life as part of Peace Corps. Certainly, I would imagine your work brings at least your gaze to other countries around the world. A sense of how other countries, how other people are conceiving of animals and also, therefore, treating them.
In a country like China, there's more and more organizations being formed to advocate for animals and to animal welfare, farm animals, dogs and cats, so on and so forth. So China is sort of going through sort of that stage that the U.S. went through, many decades ago. But it's good to see, because with that type of government, you wouldn't necessarily expect there to be that ability for the citizens to take charge and to be more vocal and advocate more for animals.
Yeah. I'd like to loop back around to China if I can in just a minute. But I wanted to speak just a second as you bring up wildlife, treatment of wildlife in other countries, and particularly in poaching. And what I'm interested in is getting a sense, if you have any idea as to the reasons for that. And just, I would speculate that it is economically motivated, and then of course my mind goes to, okay, if we shifted economies in some way to make it unnecessary that people needed to take those steps in order to have some form of income, that could be a piece of resolving this problem. Am I right, at least in getting a sense of why there is poaching and the treatment of wildlife that you speak to?
Yeah, you are. I think there's an economic driver to poaching. When I was in the Peace Corps volunteer when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa, I recall when I arrived in West Africa thinking that poachers are awful, they're horrible people, so on and so forth, and they are. They should not be illegally killing wildlife. But where I worked was a protected area with elephants and a variety of different kind of African wildlife. And once in a while, the soldiers that were part of our project, they would catch a poacher, and 9 times out of 10, the poacher was illegally killing wildlife to feed his family. And so when you start to hear that, you start to understand that it may not be as black and white as perhaps I once thought it was. But when you talk about currently the international trade in wildlife, the illegal trade in wildlife, that's largely done. That's not done by the person in the village that's just trying to kill a warthog and feed his family. That's being driven by criminal syndicates that are profiting enormously off the sale of wildlife products, ivory, rhino horn, various reptiles for the pet trade, skins, products that go into traditional Chinese medicines. A lot of people think, when they think about illegal international wildlife trade, they think of Asia and China in particular being this giant vacuum that's sucking up wildlife from around the world. And that is absolutely happening, but people don't realize that the United States is the second largest exporter and importer of wildlife in the world, second only to China. So it's not as if we have our hands clean. Now, we do have agencies and capacities that allow us to and relatively strong laws, but there's a great deal of illegal wildlife entering and leaving this country as well.
I'll just loop back around to China, and you're saying that certainly it perceives as if there's a shift going on there in a positive direction in terms of their interaction and relationships with non-human animals. Certainly, one thing I have been aware of is, frequently every year around June, there will be some media attention around the Yulin Dog Meat Festival, yeah, southern China. And this is a circumstance where is it cultural neutrality that we should exercise here and recognize that in China, in Southeast Asia more largely, there is a long-standing tradition of people eating dog meat, as people in the United States eat cows or pigs. Going back, I gathered, to 1700 BCE or something to that effect. So we're talking a long time. So I thought that this year the festival had been canceled. Apparently it hadn't been. And I think it is the issue with the Yulin Festival about the treatment of the dogs, which I gather is atrocious, but that's also a cultural issue. Or is it because it's dogs, which in the United States we feel is, I mean, those are humans' best friend, yeah? What are we contending over with Yulin?
Well, in regards to the cultural issue, yeah, there's no doubt there's cultural differences between how we view dogs and how Chinese society views dogs. It's my understanding that more and more Chinese citizens are starting to keep dogs as pets. Mm-hmm. And I think natural evolution from that is if more and more people are keeping dogs as pets, if they're understanding that dogs can provide that valuable companionship, it's inevitable that they're going to, their perspectives on eating dogs or treating dogs cruelly are going to evolve. In terms of that dog festival, yeah, it's horrendous. I've never been there. I've seen pictures, I've seen videos, so on and so forth. I think the issue there is obviously from a sort of Western perspective, we want that festival to end. Yeah. We don't want dogs to be treated that way. Yeah. Culturally, I think even if you want to accept the argument that culturally they eat dog meat in China, the question is how should we treat the dogs both before we kill them and how will we kill them? Right. As I understand it, they often brutalize those dogs to increase the adrenaline in their body because apparently that does something to the taste of the meat, or that makes the meat more valuable. Yeah. And so the issue is if you're going to continue that festival, not that I'm advocating that, but how can we make the treatment of the dogs less cruel? How can we can the Chinese legislature, Congress, Parliament, whatever it's called, can they enact laws that dictate how those dogs are treated? Not only by sort of individuals that might farm dogs for the meat industry, but also any companies or corporations that are involved in that business. And then on top of that, if we're going to kill them, how do we kill them? Instead of beating them with sticks or sticks with spikes in them, is there a more humane way that we can kill them? So, again, I think it gets back to the animal rights versus animal welfare debate. I think, frankly, everyone I know would want that festival ended because of our Western relationship with dogs. But can we, if it's going to continue, as we work towards its complete termination, can we make the lives of those dogs more humane, more or less? Can we make their treatment less cruel?
Right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. No, that's a tough one on a number of different levels.
And I would note that in terms of China, yes, there's evidence suggesting that things are improving. Good. More small groups are being formed to advocate for animals. That's not to say that things are things are. Sure. There's a great deal of there's a large number of problems still in China. They are a massive importer of wildlife. There's a lot of illegal wildlife entering the country. They continue to build. They continue to imprison orcas and dolphins in aquarium. The aquarium industry is out of control in terms of building new facilities. So that's a real black mark on the country, I think.
I think one of the things he's aiming at is that cruelty laws as they currently exist in the United States will allow for chimpanzees to be held as captives in labs and zoos by individuals as pets. And therein lies the problem with how we conceive of this, right? Because he's suggesting because of their high level of cognition, because of their understanding of a future and some sense of that, that simply holding them captive is a violation of what he considers their rights, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, we don't have, I mean, we have an Animal Welfare Act in this country, which establishes minimum standards for how we house and care for certain categories of animals, and people that are, you know, holding captive chimpanzees in laboratories or in zoos,
Yep.
or even in private collections. If they meet certain criteria, they have to be registered under the Animal Welfare Act. They're subject to inspections, but most animal protection advocates would tell you that the Animal Welfare Act, which was promulgated in the 1970s, is out of date. It's out of touch with what species need because the standards are so minimal. And how we keep chimpanzees, whether it be in somebody's backyard or in some zoos, not all zoos, but some zoos, is just deplorable.
Yeah.
And if you consider the plight of chimpanzees in the wild and how chimpanzee populations in the wild are declining, and how extensive the illegal trade in chimpanzees continues to be in this country, you know, it just demonstrates that we need to find a way to treat these chimpanzees that are in captivity better. Nobody's suggesting that these chimpanzees can necessarily be put back into a wild environment. You know, there are places that do try to retrain captive chimpanzees to live in the wild, but in many cases, it's simply a matter of promoting kindness. It's a matter of saying, you know, would we want to be treated this way? Can we do better for this animal? There are plenty of places where we can do better for chimpanzees and orangutans and captive elephants, places like sanctuaries or places where they have some semblance of a more natural life. You know, they're not going to go back to the jungles of Cameroon, but can we provide them with good nutrition, space, sunshine, play, enrichment, you know, love? I mean, those are the types of things that these animals deserve. They don't deserve to be locked up into these steel and concrete cages or in these sterile cages that used to be the norm in the laboratory world.
Help me, let's shift gears a little bit, and I'll ask you to help me explore our language around animals and what that reveals about our relationships with them. You spoke in the first half, I think, about the idea of owning animals, yeah, and certainly that's one of my pet peeves, to hear people say that personally. Additionally, I suppose that the notion of buying an animal, it grates a little bit on my spirit, I think, yeah, because my sense is that we possess and buy things. We can't buy beings, yeah. We can compensate people. We have a dog in our family that was a rescue, and we compensated the organization that helped her live, yeah, because it takes money to do that. But the notion of buying her just it sets me a little bit on edge. Can you help me and our viewers, I think a little bit about what our language reveals about us, and maybe are there any shifts that you're aware of given your line of work, and how you folks speak of animals and our relationships to them, that can help direct us in a positive direction around our relationships with non-human animals?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that pet peeve. It's certainly one of mine as well. You know, and I agree with your concern about buying animals. I know there are even members of my family who continue to, you know, when they want the dog, they're going to go to a breeder, and and they pay an absurd amount of money for a dog, where, as you say, they could go to the local shelter and save a dog's life and pay far less money as compensation for the work done by that facility. All of our animals in this house are either, found on the street or adopted from, humane societies. And if, I would just say to your listeners, to your watchers, to your audience, that if you have a space in your heart and your home for a companion animal, please don't go to a breeder. Go to a shelter. Go to your local shelter, because there are animals that are just desperately in need of a home and love, who would enjoy the chance to be your companion. And I think that issue of pets versus companion, are those two words. I think pets is still very commonly used by most people in this country, but the more and more people are starting to recognize that they're not pets per se. They are our companions. They give us love. We give them love. They give us support. We give them support. The other thing that it just drives me a little bit nutty is when we refer to animals as its or that's, when we should be referring to them as hims, hers, or whose. Because when we're, a toaster is an it. An automobile is an it. Even if some of us may name our automobiles, it's still an it. But a living sentient creature is a who, a him, or a her.
You've worked at Animal Welfare Institute for a decade now, just over a decade. So just I'm interested in why you got involved in your work there, and I guess the follow-up to that is what project there that the organization, the institute, is currently working on is something you feel is particularly important, that would be good for our viewers to hear about.
Well, I got involved due to a passion for wildlife. And frankly, when I went to Arizona State University a long time ago to get my wildlife biology degree, I naively thought that I would be surrounded by people that thought the same way that I did about wildlife. But I wasn't. I was surrounded by people that were, lifelong hunters, and they enjoyed managing wildlife for the purpose of killing wildlife. And nothing against them. I certainly stay in touch with a few of them and follow their careers, and I appreciate the work that they've done. But I was very much isolated in terms of my philosophy towards wildlife. And, but fortunately, I've had the ability to have a career working for various organizations where my philosophy was aligned with the organizational philosophy, and that has allowed me to, work on just a whole slew of different issues, from, squirrels to elephants, from whales to vaquita porpoise in the Gulf of California. As a result of my experience, I'm really what I would call a generalist. I'm not a specialist in any particular issue or species, but as a generalist, I've been exposed to a number of different issues, whether it be wildlife related or habitat related. I think one of the efforts that AWI has ongoing, and that's frankly been a campaign of AWI for decades, is this work on international wildlife trade, and working within the international arena to try to find ways to increase protections for animals that are subject to trade, not only to try to prevent them from being traded, either live or their body parts, but also to ensure that whatever trade does occur, it's done sustainably. I think that too often we fall victim to this whole idea of sustainable use, because when we talk about sustainable use, particularly in regards to the trade in live animals, whether it be elephants or chimpanzees or even frogs or snakes, the international community says, oh, it's sustainable. We can take that many animals out of the wild and we can send them to various parts of the world to live in terrariums or to live in aquariums. but we often fail to consider the welfare implications of that. And so that's something that the Animal Welfare Institute is trying to do, is to introduce more welfare concerns into international wildlife trade, and to ensure that the well-being of animals is taken into consideration in that decision-making process.
Right. Certainly, we've covered some ground today where, you know, it may be difficult to see the bright side of things in terms of some treatment of non-human animals. However, there certainly is, and you point out as well, there does seem to be a significant movement forward and progression on this front. NFL quarterback Michael Vick was roundly condemned, imprisoned for a year and a half for his dogfighting enterprise about a decade ago now. Greyhound racing is on the decline. SeaWorld is in the process of retiring its 22 orcas, I understand, while the National Institutes of Health are pasturing the 360 chimpanzees that they've been using in experiments. So it certainly seems to be, in that respect, a movement in the right direction. What do you think the future looks like that we're moving towards in terms of how animals are treated and what our relationships with them are?
Well, I think that's a good list, and I would add to that list two others that just occurred this week.
Sure.
Mexico City just a couple days ago passed an ordinance banning keeping marine mammals in captivity.
Mm-hmm.
The city of Miami, I just received an email before we started this interview. The city of Miami just a couple days ago banned the selling of dogs and cats.
Huh.
So progress is being made both in this country and internationally. And I would say that, you know, based on my 31 years working in the movement, progress has been made. I mean, we as you say, dog fighting is roundly condemned by all sectors of society, as is cockfighting in most sectors of society. When I started working, very few states had cruelty laws that included felonies, or where animal cruelty was considered felonies. Now most states have animal cruelty laws where certain types of cruelty are considered felonies. We've made progress in terms of, you know, the use of animals for dissection. We've made progress in some of the efforts to reduce or eliminate the need of animals in experiments. Zoos have reformed. They're not the cold, dank, sterile, dark, concrete and steel places that they used to be. They have more naturalistic habitats now. I would never say that you can create an entirely natural habitat for any captive animal, but reform is happening. And even internationally, whether you look in the courts or you look at, as I said earlier, laws that are being strengthened to penalize people that are illegally killing wildlife, countries that have never had cruelty laws adopting cruelty laws. And in terms of this idea of personhood for animals, if you look at India, if you look at Argentina, those courts in those countries have handled cases where they've declared that dolphins, for example, in India in 2013, were declared non-human persons. They banned keeping dolphins in captivity in India, and they said that it's morally unacceptable to keep them in captivity for human entertainment. In Argentina in 2015, there was an appeals court decision involving some captive orangutans, and they said that the orangutans have a legal right to life, liberty, and freedom from harm. And more recently, in 2016, again, the Argentinian courts ruled in favor of a chimp named Cecilia, who was kept in captivity, and basically said that she's a non-human legal person with inherent rights. And so you're seeing those types of developments, you know, throughout the world, and I think it bodes well for a continuation of not only our society but other countries sort of opening their eyes to, animal welfare, animal cruelty, and taking it much more seriously.